Good evening and welcome to another edition of Filmnut. I am your host, Jeff Schubert. Glad you can join us. Well, oftentimes you hear that filmmaking is about executing the director's vision. Well, before you can see it on the screen, it helps if you can see it on the page. And the person to see for that is called a storyboard artist. My guest tonight is an exceptional storyboard artist whose credits include Transformers, X-Men II, Jumper, Terminator III, Mission Impossible 3, Pearl Harbor, Bab Boys II, Batman Forever, just to name a few. I am looking very forward to getting into the details of what he does and how he does it with Robbie Consing.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure.
So I hate to do this. I hate to start off with the really difficult and complicated questions.
Sure.
But what is a storyboard artist and what do they do?
A storyboard artist is basically an illustrator who conceives of what the film will eventually look like on page for all the departments to be able to just get them and go, okay, this is exactly what the director wants. In other words, to illustrate their vision and disseminate it throughout the entire process of the film. It can go into a million things, including the making of and so on and so forth. So it's the very first initial artistic delineation of the film, really.
So how far after the director is brought onto the project are you brought onto the project?
God, some cases I'm the first one on, in some cases I'm the fifth one on, but you have to start storyboarding fairly early. I would say, I'm proud to say I've been the first guy, like any other storyboard guy is, to come on, usually.
Now, do you work under someone else? Is it a department?
Well, as the movie gains momentum, we have the number of our bosses grow, but usually it's the director who's sort of our main guy, then followed by the production designer, followed by the art directors, and then after that you have the visual effects supervisors. But really the directors, it's kind of like that game Stratego. There's like that one guy who has absolutely power over everybody, the director, including you, but then you're sort of free floating. You're really beholden to them more than anybody else. But of course you'll get locked out of craft service too. So it's kind of an issue.
Now, you've worked on a lot of big budget films. How many storyboard artists might work on a film like X-Men 2 versus, say, maybe House Party 3, which is something else you're credited on?
Well, it just depends on the film, the scale, and how much you're trying to get done. For example, probably the largest number of storyboard artists I've ever worked with was about 7 to 8, possibly 11, on Inspector Gadget, of all things, which wasn't a gigantic film, but they wanted to get as much done as they could. And if the director is willing to stretch the creative process that long and just say, okay, I want 4 guys working on 4 different sequences, the one price you pay, there's a slight inconsistency in terms of the vision being distilled among so many people. Same with effects houses when they do that thing where there's a big supervisor and shooting it out to like 15 different effects houses. What's always good is to have, one to 2 people, one guy doing this big scene, another guy doing this other big scene, and it keeps everything within a certain level of creative consistency.
So a director will break down a script, and is it random who gets assigned what, or do you have specialties within your field?
Specialties for the most part. I mean, every director I know has, or every director I've worked with usually has a guy either previous to me or somebody else after me who they like working with because they sort of can read their minds in a way. And it's not to say that you're going to be ever that guy who's going to sit there and make sure that there's enough sunlight at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and to get your huge scene done in there, because you're not the director, but you can conceptualize, get into their minds, and read the script the way they would, see shots, and cut out a lot of guesswork. Because there's nothing like, a week or 2 has passed by, you turn in your scene, and it makes it's not even close to what they were thinking.
Right. Have you worked on a handful of films where you were the sole storyboard artist?
I'd say about 80% of the time I'm the sole storyboard artist, but the other 20 is probably the most fun I've ever had as well.
Well, I know we have some of your work with us, so let's take a look at some of your work, and maybe you can talk us through the particular boards. What are we looking at?
This is Transformers. This is the opening sequence in the Qatar Air Force Base. And actually, I kind of like looking at boards that weren't done exactly the way they were. The shots are the same, but originally Michael Bay's original thought on this process was he didn't want to reveal the Transformers right off the bat. He wanted to show a sandstorm, sort of like the beginning of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But when I saw the film, the shots are still the same. There's still this high-pitched signal that rips apart the whole base and disables all the electronic systems. But he did show the Transformer a lot earlier than I thought. This is, of course, when everything gets really sandy, so to speak. The atmospherics get out of control, and in the next frame, we'll see that this thing starts to transform, but we still don't get a good look at it. And everyone's basically, the whole base goes on red alert because this thing just rips it apart, just opens fire.
Now we can come back live for a minute. So you've worked a lot with Michael Bay's,
yes,
right?
I've done all of Michael's movies since The Rock.
Fantastic. So do you have some sort of psychic relationship where you know what the other wants or expects from the other? He keeps coming back to you?
Well, the great thing about Michael is he really goes for it. He just goes for the best, most dynamic way to shoot. And I'm actually a big fan of his as well as a director. I find him to be, he's fun to work with. He's never yelled at me, thank God. And I just like him. He's just a cool guy. But the most painful thing in the world, I did a large movie back in the early 90s, and and I was watching a sequence involving a helicopter pulling somebody around. I won't name who. And I was just really disappointed when I saw the film. I'm like, wow, that's a really weird interpretation of it. Of course, the film's kind of been remade since then with Christian Bale. And I find, and it wasn't a bad, the first version that I worked on wasn't a bad film. It just, I just wish it was more visceral and more dynamic. And the thing about Michael is you don't have that problem at all. And I'm actually a fan of that other director as well because he's done some really good stuff. But when it comes to like action dynamics, Michael, Spielberg, those guys, just David Fincher, these guys just have IT. I don't know what you call it, but they're just damn good. J.J. Abrams, same thing.
Talk about the creative component of being a storyboard artist, and I'm not just talking about obviously the ability to draw, but are you basically just drawing what's written on the page for you, or is there a creative element where you're contributing creatively to the story?
Oh God, there's. The process is so. It's like basically handing someone a blank page. They're like, for Bad Boys II, it was Michael just basically said, okay, here, this is it. Drug dealer, bust, and at the end they have to get to Guantanamo Bay. That was almost and it's about ecstasy or counterfeiting money.
You're given that bit of information and then draw it.
Run with it.
Run with it.
One of my favorite stories really is Michael and I went to Miami with Jerry Bruckheimer and Barry Waldman, and literally Michael just got off the plane and we're like, okay, we're going to look for ways to kill people. I mean, to be crass about it, that's what it was. And on Bad Boys II, we were on the freeway and we were just walking around, and suddenly I got out of the car, and I just finished Terminator 3 at that point. Got out of the car and I said, Michael, I pitched an idea to Jonathan Mostow, and I said, what if the T3 or TX or whatever you call her fired a plasma rifle at a car carrier and sent cars everywhere? And Michael's like, that sounds cool. Let's do that. And then, lo and behold, we have the Bad Boys 2 car chase, which with all the cars flipping out over the Miami Causeway. And that's from whence good ideas come, really. Sometimes it's ideas that didn't work in the last film that they never did, or you're looking at something one day and you're like, well, wouldn't that be funny if that, and if that thing derailed and almost hit us, like a train or something, and that's the process, really.
Yeah, so you're participating in the creative process.
Absolutely, it's a collaboration.
Cherry Pie would like to ask you, how often does the director go away from the storyboard's vision when they are shooting the scene, and what type of circumstance would cause this to happen?
You know what? Seriously, creative lightning. I mean, if the director is sitting there and says, wow, look at that gigantic window there. Wouldn't it be great if Optimus Prime, instead of like doing it like what he does in the boards, picking up a car or whatever, what if he crashes through the window instead? It's what's there on set. It's what happens. It's same with any trick of the light, trick of just the traffic suddenly looks kind of cool in a certain shot, and then suddenly the director will say, you know what, instead of having a foot chase, let's have the guys run on top of the cars like in Seven, instead of them just running into an alley. That kind of a thing.
Now, would you be called in midstream? Okay, you've storyboarded the set, maybe the script in pre-production, but now scripts get rewritten while they're shooting. Would
Yes.
you get called while the movie's shooting to do new boards for new ideas?
Absolutely, yeah. On Pearl Harbor was a good example of that because we shot we focused so much on the attack during the film and the Pearl Harbor attack that really the rest of there's so much more tissue in between that. And just I'm speaking strictly of action. And there's so much really to cover in between those things. And I remember being in downtown in the sets for the hospital that were being attacked by by Japanese planes, and you're seeing jeeps getting thrown into the air and windows getting shattered. And Michael had me in his trailer. We're doing that while I'm also doing the English-German fight sequences in aerial dogfights. So I'm working with the Animatics guys, driving back and forth to Bay Films and doing all this other stuff. It was a lot of fun.
The Animatics guys, explain for the audience what 3D Animatics is.
Now, 3D Animatics are basically a really beautiful cartoon of what the film will look like eventually, and it's really the cutting edge of pre-visualization of films. Luckily, there's the old story about Phil Tippett watching Jurassic Park and fainting and going, oh my God, but he wound up adapting to it. And luckily, storyboarding has a very strong place in pre-visualization, in that we're sort of the space monkeys that go in there first, and then we work with the animatics guys, who themselves are amazing filmmakers. I mean, I showed you some stuff before the show started from Mission Impossible 3 that my friend Laurent did.
What's that website?
It was previs.org.
Previs.org, yeah. Before we came on live, he showed me this website of Mission Impossible 3, which he also worked on, and this kind of 3D cartoon that he's explaining to you. It's very cool.
It's stunning.
It's stunning.
Yeah, and it's like watching the movie. And again, it's two different processes. We storyboard guys are sometimes, in some cases, you can go directly to the animatic process, but it's not likely, simply because there's so much to do on a film. And we usually supervise the scenes in some cases. In some cases, they just run with it and do something brilliant with it. It's a collaboration, and it was sort of an issue, really, politically, with our unions and us and them, and we realized there is no us and them. It's just all us, and we really can collaborate. And I know some storyboard guys who work for animatics companies, and I've always fought for my friend Laurent to be on the films that I do, and so on and so forth.
Well, speaking of technology, then, you've been doing this for a while, right?
19 years.
19 years. How has the technology, aside from 3D animatics, changed for you and what you do?
Well, a long time ago, there was this thing called Photoshop, which reared its beautiful head. At first, its ugly head, because I was just like, oh my God, what is this thing? I'm a pencil paper guy. But really, Photoshop changed everything. It helped you organize, I mean, a long time ago, if you wanted to, let's say, do a lens flare on a drawing, which sounds kind of like, whatever, you'd have to have an air tank, and you'd have to have a little nozzle and spray on it, and then pump the tank, and then spray it again, and then if you missed, you ruined your drawing, or you could color copy it. Color copiers cost $4 a shot, and a color copier cost like probably still does, like $12,000. Now $100 buys you an all-in-one copier scanner. But then there's other things you can buy. They're super expensive to replace that expense. Like there's something called a Cintiq tablet, where you can draw directly onto your drawing, like drawing on a monitor. And technology is a wonderful thing, but in the end, if you don't have the skill to kind of understand things cinematically as an artist, it's not really going to help that much.
Well, like with editing we were talking about, right, there are some editors who can just edit on computers and not necessarily know how to cut film. Are there skills that you feel are being lost on the young storyboard artists today?
Yeah, well, for one thing, it's almost in reverse. If you're a young storyboard artist and you don't know Photoshop, you're going to be seriously handicapped, because you can't send your work in. I'm working from home right now on a pretty major film, and I've gone to the art department maybe twice, 3 times. I just met the guys the other day, and I've been on this film since late February. So it's been a blast, and I think these guys, the younger guys, they have to know Photoshop, but if they're really smart, to know After Effects, which is another great program which lets you do what's called a 2D animatic, which is sort of a compromise between doing these full-blown cartoons and manipulating your drawings to look like they're moving through space. I saw some really beautiful stuff that my friend Chris Glass did on Angels and Demons and Spider-Man that were just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
Wonderful. Let's get to another instant message from Randy of the ArnoldFans.com. Arnold Schwarzenegger fans, they love to tune in when we have a guest who's worked on an Arnold Schwarzenegger project. You qualify with Terminator 3, correct? What are some of the big action sequences that you storyboarded for T3 that didn't make the final cut? Can you talk about some of these deleted scenes?
Sure. Interesting that people would know that. But one very interesting thing is...
You cannot fool the Arnold fans.
No, you can't. My very first day of my job on Terminator 3 was September 10th, 2001. The next day was September 11th, 2001, and we had to cut out a hell of a lot of stuff. We had to cut out an airplane slamming into a building. We had to cut out the terrorist aspects of what Sarah Connor was all about. And I think we still came out with a pretty good film. I actually quite enjoyed it, and I wasn't surprised, because I really liked Jonathan Mostow a lot, and I loved U-571, and I loved Breakdown. But what really surprised me was just how the scale of these action sequences that he'd pulled off. But the rewrites, I mean, every film goes through this for logistical reasons, for plot reasons, whatever. But Terminator 3 in particular, we weren't as obsessed with the mythology as, say, the new Terminator film is. We were just really continuing sort of the same sort of breakneck pace, and we were up. I mean, I did Bad Boys II and Terminator 3 around that time. We were all up against the shadow of Matrix Reloaded. We were mortified of it, and any car chase around that time was in the shadow of the $40 million 8-week built a freeway down in San Francisco specter of this giant thing. And I remember having a heart attack about Bad Boys 2 when I saw the trailer for Reloaded, and you can see cars flipping over in a freeway, and I'm like, I remember Michael calling, going, just take a deep breath and relax. But back to his question, there's a lot of really more minor finagling on the fight scenes. There wasn't anything that you could sit there and say, wow, this is a major thematic change, but there was a lot of things that changed that had anything to do with terrorism, had anything to do with planes slamming into buildings. I mean, even the slightest thing that could be controversial, we yanked, because we knew that we were in for the long haul for years of people, of these things being verboten, you know.
Well, out of the corner of my eye, I see another T3 question, so we'll stay on that topic for another question. Miles asks, one of my biggest problems with Terminator 3 was the very short final battle between Arnold and the Terminator. Did you storyboard a much longer fight scene for this end battle?
Oh, the ones with stuff in the bathroom and all in the complex. Well, the fight that's in the actual door was much longer, and then the fight to get to that complex used to be, I mean, there's a whole huge, gigantic battle sequence that we do in the Air Force Base, I guess, leading up to the climax of the film. I don't remember it being longer. I just remember it being more spectacular. You know, you had to shave down quite a bit. You see a destroyed airfield in the background. I remember there was some hijinks that happened there. And but really, for the most part, it wasn't. I mean, we had a lot of money. It was like the largest approved budget at the time. And so I can't really say that things were scaled down, but or were cut out. It was a long film. I mean, and really, I think we hit the emotional parts of it with Nick Stahl being John Connor and him pounding the car and that whole emotional sequence. But I don't think Jonathan really, you know, dropped anything that wasn't droppable.
Now, is that common for you then, when you storyboard, to work on more material than will actually be used?
Oh, absolutely.
Or for it to be used differently?
Yeah, one of my pride and joys, one of my favorite sequences I've ever storyboarded, and Steven Spielberg gave me complete control, was the car factory sequence in Minority Report. I wish I brought, if you get the 2-disc DVD, you'll see the entire fight, and it is something out of Temple of Doom, where they're fighting on conveyor belts, punching each other, and yada, yada, yada. But I actually like much more what Steven did for Minority, because it's, in the end, it was shorter. It was between the two characters. They duke it out. It's very visceral. It's spectacular, but it's as long as it needs to be. And he cut me loose completely to come up with everything. And the animatics guys and all the effects guys and everybody did such a magnificent job, like nailing it, that I was proud to be a part of that film and that scene. I love Minority Report.
Great. So we talked about creatively, how creative the position of storyboard artist is. Let's talk about technically, how much knowledge of filmmaking do you have to be a good storyboard artist?
How much knowledge of filmmaking do you have to be a good? Well, there's two kinds of directors. There's directors who give you everything you need to draw, and if your skills, if your knowledge is marginal, or I wouldn't say that's a terrible word, marginal. If your knowledge of filmmaking is still budding at that point, you can actually get away with directors, ironically, who are very technical and know exactly what they want. One director I love working with is Danny Cannon, who I did Judge Dredd with, and he just gives me, and I still know what you did last summer, he gives me everything I need to work with, and he's a fantastic guy, and you can just bat filmmaking references around with him. And really, if I didn't know that much about film, I could just as easily work with him, because he knows exactly what he wants. Same with David Fincher. On The Game, it's funny, on The Game, you could do everything that he wants. And if you diverge 1 inch, he'd love it. He'll let you, but he's just such a technocrat that it's not something you really want to try, because he thought it out quite a bit, you know. And English directors seem to be more on that side. American directors seem to give you more latitude, I noticed. Michael Bay was like that at first, and then after a week, I just said, fuck it, I'm going to do what I wanted. I'm going to do whatever I wanted to, and that's that, and it worked, and that's how our friendship blossomed from there.
Minimally, would you say that a good storyboard artist would at least have to have a command of the language of film, set terminology, that sort of thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. At the very least, a working knowledge of lenses. And if someone says crane down, boom down, dolly left, dolly right, those are the most basic terms possible. But you learn that so quickly. I mean, there's nothing more important than just drawing every day. whether you're, I was just mentioning earlier, whether you're doing it through Craigslist or whether you're doing it through a major studio, however you got your job, if you just keep drawing every day, it gets easier and easier and easier. I mean, one thing I've learned is that I know so many guys who get rusty, and the best way to get rusty is to just get bored with it, or to not draw, and then.
And how good a drawer do you have to be for the purposes of storyboarding? I mean, can stick figures work, or? Stick
figures can, well, with the advent of 3D animatics, you can get away with, I wouldn't say stick figures, but you can certainly get away with more rudimentary drawing skills if you actually, the thing is, if you can communicate well through your drawings, then boom, it's done, and it can go right out there. And the virtuosity of your is that a real word? Is how good you are as an artist is wonderful, and it looks great, and it makes the movie look better, especially if you're doing a movie that has heavy production design. I'm working on a movie now that has a sort of dystopian Blade Runner type future in it. Yes, I do have to nail the columns and nail the references and all these things, and get what the other production illustrators, the guys who do the full-time designs, incorporate their work in there, so that at the very least you have to create a good facsimile of what they do. But honestly, the stick figure stuff, if you're doing a film that's set in we were talking earlier about a micro budget film set in a house. Right. Well, that could be Panic Room. Right. That's a $150 million film set in a house. Right. You know, so it's just up to you and to them as to how much they need from you, and if it goes right into the animatics, or if there's no animatics, that they can shoot that as a shot list, you're set.
Sherry would like to ask, what type of training would someone need, schooling, etc., to become a storyboarder, and how does one get started?
Well, there's a lot of ways. Probably the easiest way to get in is obviously to draw, to just keep drawing. Pasadena Art Center, UCLA Extension, where I lecture sometimes, is probably the best way to, is the question the entry level thing? Yeah, is to basically, or Craigslist, to find people who are doing student films, USC, AFI, any one of these places. They would love to get a storyboard person or someone who can draw even those stick figures, because your stick figures are someone else's Da Vinci's, you know.
But are there any, like, you know, for example, PA is the path to producer, mailroom is the path to being an agent. As a storyboard artist, is it either you're a storyboard artist or you're not? Is there an assistant storyboard artist position?
Well, here's the thing. I was a PA on a movie called Serpent and the Rainbow, and that was in 1987. I was like in high school, stacking up free periods to get out there. Saw drawings lying around, took a shot at it, and I just started I mean, look, when you're younger, you just pile up books of drawings. You just draw for fun. Just turn that slightly, inch it left or right, and make that your goal as a storyboard guy to kind of, if that's the field you've chosen, to start to do the discipline of putting it in a cinematic frame. Once you get out there, and this is very crucial, start looking around in places like UCLA Extension to teach storyboarding, because the one thing about storyboarding, as opposed to, say, other disciplines in night schools and extension classes, that does not apply to storyboarding, is those who can do, those who can't teach. In UCLA Extension's case, those who can teach can do as well. They have good storyboard people there who, for whatever benevolent reason, want to teach people how to do it. And I lecture at my friend's post-production class, and I have a good time there, and everyone's eager to learn, and some of them are really excellent artists, and all they need is just that right shove.
Yeah, I'd like to see that person say to you, those who can do, those who can't do, teach, with all the movies you've worked on and are working on, you know?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, but I'd lecture, though, and I've been asked by, I've been asked a couple of times to actually teach well, not full-time, but like, you know, once a week. Sure. I would love it. It would actually be something I'd like to do. Another important thing is to find possibly an agency. I'm with Frameworks Artist Agency, which is a fantastic place. Helped me get this interview. And they're fantastic in that they can adapt to any level that people who enter the field can go into. I'm still with them. I've done, like, you know, God knows how many movies at this point. But they'll also find people who are fresh out of school, who are starting out, and they can get into it at, like, you know, doing low-budget commercials, the jobs that, like, perhaps maybe I wouldn't be able to do, but someone else could.
Great.
And they're fantastic. And I like them because they're also good with pep talks when things get a little slow.
There you go, and we know it's been that way for everyone recently.
Oh, yeah. I'm just kidding.
Now, some directors, they like to work off of shot list, and they feel like, yeah,
Yes.
we can skimp on the storyboard. First of all, should all films have storyboards? Are they more important for action or CGI type films than like talking heads dialogue films?
Yeah,
And why should a director not rely on just a shot list? A couple of questions there.
Well, number one, it gets a little frustrating when they don't have the resources or the time to storyboard an entire film, and that's what they ask, because obviously there's a prioritization. There's the action scenes, scenes with visual effects, locations, and then you just go down the list, and then finally we get actors' nude scenes, which not my particular favorite because I'm terrible at drawing people. But you just get to a point where you're sitting there going, okay, you don't really need to do this. I mean, and that's just paper. But if you save them one shot, that's one day of filming, or a $500,000 VFX shot because it's really not necessary, you can combine two other shots, that's a big factor for them as well. Now, if you're talking about low budget, indie filmmaking, then you really have to pick what you feel. You should be disciplined enough to know what to give to a storyboard artist. If you want to board the whole film, fine. I know that that movie Shoot, the one with Clive Owen and Monica Bellucci. I forgot what it was called. Not Shoot to Kill, or something with Paul Giamatti. That whole movie was storyboarded, and it was, I think, directed by a storyboard artist. And we're all trying to break in, really. And it's just bizarre to me that people would want to board an entire film. But if there's a shot list, there's a storyboard that can be done, even if it's like what we said, a stick figure.
And on Craigslist, you can always find new people willing to break in.
And new people willing to break you in. I remember looking at some people who, I used to be addicted to Craigslist, and people would send me storyboarding ads, and I'm just like, oh, screw that. I'm not going to do a whole movie for free. But once I needed an editor, and I traded him favors I storyboarded something of his, and we definitely were even on the work thing, because I needed someone to edit my reel or do a website for me. And it's not a bad transaction thing. I'd probably rather pay someone now at this point. But
Red Heat would like to ask you, will Robbie be at Comic-Con this year signing at a booth, and what is his next film project?
Oh, two good questions. I was at Comic-Con last year, so why not? I don't think I'll have a booth. I just wander around and basically, pick fights with guys dressed like Klingons and stuff. But my Comic-Con, yeah, I'll go. You've convinced me. And what is my next film project? It's a movie called Priest. It's a sci-fi horror action western, just like the rest of them. No, I'm just kidding. It's a Korean manga being turned into a giant sci-fi film that's coming out probably in 2 years, and being directed by a guy I love working with, a guy named Scott Stewart. And it's basically Blade Runner meets the West meets vampires meets giant shootouts and runaway train type fun.
Hey, right now, if it's got vampires in it, I'm sure it's going to be a big hit.
Oh, these are different. These aren't Robert Pattinson type vampires. These things will bite your head off and spit it out. It's fun stuff.
The Gillinator, what is your process and some of the challenges when turning a script into images? Is there any projects that you worked on in particular that were very difficult for you?
That were very challenging. They're all, I mean, the set of challenges are the same. The level of support you get from it. I think the process, is the biggest challenge. I worked with one director who directed one of my favorite action films of all time, and it was a really disappointing thing to do another movie with him after. I mean, I didn't do the film that I loved so much, and I won't say what it is because you'll figure out who it is. But he was just giving me the worst possible ways to attack things. Like he would say, okay, I want this angle, 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 and I'm like, what are we in a 7-Eleven? What do you need so many angles for? Can't we just do this as a through line to build suspense and action? He's like, yeah, well, draw them up so I can decide. And I'm like, I'm all about that. I'm fine with that. But it was just such a waste of time. And the funny thing was, Stan Winston walked in while we were talking, the late, great Stan Winston.
Yeah.
And then they threw him out of the room like he was some PA or something. And I'm like, God, what did you do that for? So, I don't know, just a little funny anecdote on that.
Sure, no, it's good.
Stan Winston walked in.
Are there any misconceptions about what you do?
Yes, we do like to eat when we're on sets, so we do like to get access to craft service, or we like to get onto the set when we don't have our IDs. Because I love security people because they're the ones I can hang with, but sometimes they just have no idea what the hell you just said as far as what a storyboard artist is. They're like, huh? Hold on, yeah, no, they can't eat there, no. But at the same time, then suddenly you're eating in the director's trailer, so that's a good thing.
We have some more of your pictures. I want to take a look at them before we wind down on time here. Brian, do we have those ready? Here we go. What are we looking at?
Oh, it's still Transformers. This is the scene when the soldiers are running up to the, I guess the robot is Devastator. Do we have any of the other ones?
Can we skip forward to maybe Minority Report or Pearl Harbor?
Okay, there we go. That's some of the better stuff. Well, there's this is when Devastator flies in and passes the phalanx of security, or in Qatar, all these different vehicles. Now, this is interesting because this scene was done, I guess, 2006. The movie had so much animation to do. Sorry, 2005, late 2004. So much animation to do, but for some reason they whipped ass and got They got Transformers 2 done pretty quickly, I'd say, even with a writer's strike and other such strikes. And here's where the helicopter comes in and lands. And Michael loves everything in blue, and to create that sort of that look of diffusion and whatnot.
Speaking of color, why are some storyboards done in color versus black and white?
Well, these are monochromatic, so it's blue, but as opposed to achromatic. But it just looks cooler to have certain, like the lens flare for some reason on Photoshop creates this reddish glow, and then when you press auto color, it just kind of colors it for you. It creates a sort of a level of effort that you weren't planning on, and not a level of effort, a level of kind of, it looks cool. It just looks nice. But some directors I know like that bluish gray tone to them. It kind of translates well as opposed to looking like a Xerox that popped out.
Now, we were talking about what does a storyboard artist need to understand filmmaking-wise. We talked about terminology, but I think before we came on, and I think it's important to stay on air, you mentioned knowing about the different lenses, right?
Yes, absolutely, very important. Want to learn about that? The best way to get into that is to buy a SLR camera, a digital SLR camera, or buy a camera that has an attached lens but has a long, what's the word I'm thinking? It has a, what's the term? Zoom range. So that way, and most cameras now have like 27, 24 millimeter, all the way to like 105. And you're not going to go over 105 on any set unless you're shooting unless you're shooting someone skydiving.
And why is it important for
It's important because you can actually learn what the difference is in focal ranges and lens sizes. For example, if I were to shoot you standing here right now with a 27 millimeter lens, I would see your feet, I would see the top of your head, I would see this much. However, if I had a 70 millimeter lens, I'd cut you off like in a portrait. You need to know those things. In fact, it's absolutely necessary, because when someone says, all right, I want two cars racing at 70 miles per hour with things blurring by, that means that you're shooting with a long lens. Chances are like 120, because the camera car has to be this far away. But then if you're shooting and then they say, well, we want a camera car 5 feet from the front of the bumper, then that's another matter entirely. That's going to be like a 24 millimeter lens, and it's going to be locked on some kind of camera car. What do you call those things? They had them in Born Supremacy. They're fantastic. They're basically attached to the thing, and they can swing left and right, and you can see the actor's face, and that's the whole point of that shot, so on and so forth. That's like high-tech second unit talk I just completely garbled.
No, that's okay. Though, but you get the point across that you need to know about lenses and angles and depth of field. I
think listening and communicating are probably the most important things, because it's so hard to like literally bottle the air when you talk to a director, and it's so hard to get that information on paper and nail it right. But when you hit a home run, it's the best thing in the world, especially when the director says, come up with something cool, and you do, and you hand back, something that they just love.
And another tool in your toolbox is not just drawing or not just working on computers, but taking pictures of actors and doing what? And cars and scenes?
Not the actual actors.
Not the actual actors, but
prop actors.
Prop actors.
When I was working on the game, there's a scene in that film where David had, it's a scene when SWAT people invade a house that Michael Douglas doesn't realize is a setup, which is in turn another setup. And what David did was he handed me Polaroids with the location scout doing this and aiming his gun left and right. And my God, was that invaluably helpful. I mean, he had Polaroids for everything. It's like, here's a Polaroid of where they creep up across the street. And of course, now with digital cameras, you don't need Polaroids anymore. You can just, he can control the cinematography, he can create a look. And
you draw right over that.
I did. I would actually just lessen the contrast and draw right over it and just put SWAT gear on the location scout. Put a little monocle for night vision and so on and so forth.
Wonderful. Now, do you have any websites or anything where people who want to know more about you can go? Knowing
more about me, my Facebook account.
You have Pearl Harbor, you did a DVD extra on that, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The Pearl Harbor Special Edition DVD, the one with a 4-disc set. On the back, I give a 40-minute commentary talk. Give a 40-minute commentary about visual effects, about storyboarding, and they show the actual film, the making of, the 3D animatic, and the storyboards concurrently. So you might get a little wall-eyed, but it's pretty cool. Minority Report has some of my work on it as well, and the 2-disc set. I mean, the 1-disc sets won't have my stuff, but the Mission Impossible 2 does as well. And to recommend another friend, one of my favorite storyboard artists in the world is my friend Sylvain Dupre. I hope I pronounced his name right. He has a site called www.nuclearburn.com. It has the coolest interface you'll ever see, but it has all his boards from, like, he's Ridley Scott's storyboard guy, very enviable position. And Dracula has my friend Peter Ramsey's boards, which are fantastic. And they also show what happens when they become 2D animatics, where they show the actors reading out stuff and the rehearsals, and it's a very comprehensive look at the process of it. Pearl Harbor disc is too, actually. It's like start to finish. Very happy with that stuff.
Michael Bay's favorite storyboard guy, not a bad position to be either.
Never hurts.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been great talking to you.
Wow, it's fast. Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing more of your work. What was the name of that new film again?
Priest. It's not going to come out for another year or so.
Okay.
But as far as the movies I've worked on coming out sooner, something called, the title changed. It was called They Came From Upstairs, but now I think it's called Aliens versus something. It's got Ashley Tisdale in it. And a couple an animated film called, everything keeps changing their titles, but Whiteout with, it's a Dominic Sena film that's coming out from Silver Pictures, same people who did The Matrix and so on. So there you are. Awesome. Thanks so much again for coming in. Thank you very much. That is going to do it for this edition of Filmnut. We will see you next time. How's that? Great. Great, thank you.